Okay, very good. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning into this conversation between our Living Alone and Connected group moderators, Michelle, that's me, and Catherine.
Hi.
And today we have Debra in the conversation room with us to talk about her books and her work with family caregivers and people with dementia and where there are opportunities to have better, more productive, meaningful conversations about things like living independently, or accepting help and support when you need it. Very universal themes, but we're going to talk about that today in the lens of being in a situation where you might need a little more support from other people around you and how we can have conversations about that. So I will let Debra say a little about herself and her work and how she got to this work, and then we'll talk about some topics from her book.
Sure, sure. Um, so I was a caregiver for 9 years, first to my dad and then to my mom. And that, eh, long story short, I wound up starting my own business because I lost my job due to caregiving. And that evolved in a lot of ways, from a blog to doing guest speaking to a book. And that book came out of my blogs and my mom. I quickly realized that if my mother and I didn't start communicating differently and better than we had when I was younger, we were going to completely blow up the relationship. And so there were just some themes that kept coming up, like my mother was an adult. I needed to treat her like an adult. I needed to be able to set boundaries in a way that was clear and not hurtful. I needed to learn how to ask for and say yes to help and help my mother say yes to help. And I think probably the most important thing I learned was how to deal with all the emotions that caregiving and even being someone with dementia diagnosis has, because as a caregiver, it's not the task that will make you sick, it's the emotions around the task. And as someone living with dementia, you know, this is one of those diseases that was for a long time like cancer. Like, people are like, she has cancer, and that is what happens with dementia, when in reality, we need to bring that up into the light um, as often as we can, in as many ways as we can. Otherwise, you can't set boundaries, you can't ask for help, you won't be able to deal with your emotions. So that first book morphed into the second book, particularly for dementia family caregivers and helping them to understand the journey that they're going to go through and the person that they're caring for is going to go through. So that's how I got here.
Yes, and actually, I'm remembering now that I helped Deb with some edits of the book, or doing some proofreading and reading some advanced copies and drafts and editions. And so I remember how much I loved the work that she did in that book and still love it. But I got to have a close look at it that way. And I just thought, wow, this is so needed. This is something that's always been missing from the broader conversations about aging in place and supporting people who have challenges because of changes that come with age, not just sweeping it all under one thing, like you're getting older, you need help. But I just loved the way too that you talked about family dynamics, and even what you said about your experience with your mother. It's not just that you all of a sudden become a caregiver and you start helping your parents. A lot of the emotional stuff that comes up and bubbles up from that trickles into the relationship. And that can either blow things up, or it can grow some new, areas of like grow a new garden. So it can either like explode the patio, or you can, kind of. So I loved the approach in your books to bringing those things into the light that you're kind of, tripping over again and again in your relationship, and really getting to the heart of those things. And then, of course, for purposes of today, looking more specifically about dementia, because that impacts already difficult relationships in significant ways, because so much of going through changes with memory, loss, and cognition, you know, really interferes with those relational kind of abilities and communication. So maybe if you could start there, like what are some of the things that you see when you come to a new situation, or some of the stories maybe you reference in the book where there's communication barriers in the relationship because of dementia. Does that, if that makes sense, just as a
No,
place?
it does. It
Yeah.
does. I think the biggest thing that I see is if somebody aggravated and frustrated you prior to the dementia diagnosis, that's not going to change. In fact, it's probably going to get exasperated, right? Because one of the things about dementia is oftentimes highlights someone's personality to the good or the bad. Okay. So, for the person who has dementia, you know, they it's really hard as the disease progresses to moderate those feelings and what you say, mainly because it's just you can't express it, right? And so that expression of frustration or even being cold or hungry eventually comes out in other ways. And so we need to recognize that, you know, both people have got a part of this frustration that will come up. And both people need to learn to give themselves grace and empathy. And as time moves on, it really becomes kind of on the caregiver to always take that step back and say, it's not them, it's the disease. Or, yes, they are being stubborn like they always were, but now it's not because they don't want to do it, it's because this is how they can express themselves. Um, so, yeah, it's, all those emotions, and let me back up a step. One of the things I found with my mother, and I think is really important for the person living with dementia to understand, is the underlying emotion to almost everything is grief. And we don't get to express that. And that's particularly difficult whether you're caring for someone with dementia, because that is a loss that you see every day. It goes on and on and on for you and for them, because in the very beginning, they know full well they're losing themselves. And so there is such grief in that. And because they're still in front of you, people will say, oh, but you still have her. No, I don't. No, I don't. And so that is a platitude I don't need. And that is where I start to say, there are some people in this journey you need to put aside. It might be forever, and that's okay, or it might be for a time, and that's okay as well. So I recognize, one of the stories I talk about, we were having dinner with my mom, and she said, "Can I have the ketchup?" And I said, "Can I do it for you?" And she said, "No." And in my head, I'm going, I'm gonna have to clean this up because my mom couldn't see, and yeah, she missed the dish, right? And the initial was frustration and anger, and then after I got a little bit of time, I realized what was underlying that was grief. This is one more thing she can't do for herself. This is one more loss for me and for her. And so when you feel those emotions bubbling up, at the moment it's okay to have them. Good Lord, you're human. But I want you to take a breath, stop, and say, okay, the anger, the frustration was real, and there's a reason for it. But where is the grief in this? And how do I express that? Because so many of my emotions came out as anger or frustration or whatever, and underlying it was grief.
That's so powerful and so good. And in some of the reading I've done and learning I've done and therapy work I've done in my own caregiving relationships in my life, I think somebody along the way or something I read along the way said that anger is a secondary emotion. And it's really more a symptom of your grief than an actual, you can feel angry in the feelings kind of way, but emotionally, like you said, what's really happening is grief. And some people get angry about it in a way that, it comes out in frustration, agitation, etc. And then others maybe retreat, or, maybe that family caregiver that you're like, oh, well, I do everything, but brother A or brother B or sister across the country. She just gets to, swoop in and be the hero. And while there are sometimes, personality conflicts and things like that, or people in our, circles where maybe that is kind of the MO, but it could be more a function of their grief that they would rather avoid. And so I think what you're doing in the books and in your work is so good, bringing those things out into the open so that it doesn't just keep going that way. There are things you can do to try and bring people together that couldn't be brought together before, because what you do all share in common as siblings is a relationship with a family member who is changing and who you are all grieving in your own different ways, which then
Mhm.
comes out in you don't do enough or you do too much and that's on you and all of that kind of stuff. So
Yeah.
if would you want to maybe give like some highlights from both books really, because I would imagine there's some universal things that are kind of in both books, that aren't just specific to dementia, but some of the, kind of main themes of like how do you get these conversations about the contract started, or even just talking about what you mean by your relationship contract, which is, in the title of
Yeah.
your book.
Let me start that. I know it's such a
Yeah.
weird book that it needs an explanation, because the first one is called your relationship contract. And the other one is your relationship contract for dementia caregivers. So one of the things I realized with my mom early on is that every relationship is a contract, an unspoken contract. And so it is the way that you are in relationship to one another. It is the way you support one another. It is that social activities that bind those together, right? So what I find oftentimes with dementia, folks living with dementia and their caregivers are that last one, the hardest one is hits the hardest because it's the most obvious. We can't go out to dinner anymore. We used to love to go dancing, right? And so one of the things it says is that we need to recognize how the relationship has changed and is going to continue to change. And then we need to find another way or other ways to, as much as possible, continue that social activity modified or something similar to it, because that's the glue. That's where the laughter happens, right? That's where the fun in the relationship happens. And so the social activities are a really big blinker for a lot of people, like, oh no. And there's grief in that because you have to let go of that person, right? Um, the other thing that, and then there's also kind of the way that you're in relationship with one another. And by far the clearest example I can give you, and this is in both books, is you've got a married couple and one of them loses a significant amount of weight, right? Now, the way they were in relationship with one another, part of what they did is they would go to the movies and get treats and they'd go out to dinner. And now all of a sudden, the person who lost weight, I say, well, no, I don't want to do that, right? Without having a conversation that says, I don't want to do that because I'm afraid I'm going to put the weight loss in jeopardy, which sometimes you don't even realize, right? And then say, how can we be together in other ways? That partner is just like they're backing away, they're not holding up to their part of the bargain, all of that good stuff. So and so what I realized when I became my mother's caregiver, and this is especially true of if you're a spouse and caring for someone with dementia, right? Have a way of being with one another now that is going to change or is changing. Okay. And so there's all kinds of emotions that comes up with that. And you have to figure out ways to either do it differently or get help in doing it differently. You know, Again, the story in the book is that when my dad was in the hospital in November 2014, and then he died in February of 2015. So, it was really not a good time in between. Um, I moved back in with my mother and I was following their um, routine at bedtime. So they'd go into the kitchen. My father would take my mother's blood. He would give her food if she needed it. He'd bring the toothbrush and toothpaste from the bathroom into the kitchen. He'd put her eye drops in. And then he'd go in the bedroom and he'd close the blinds, pull the bed down, bring in her water, get her clothes out. That I was exhausted by that time. And I was getting more and more resentful and angry. And finally, one day I thought, I can't do what my father did. I can't hold his contract that they had. My mother and I need to create a new one for ourselves. And so this started to be where I set boundaries, right? So I thought, okay, for some reason, bringing that toothbrush and toothpaste into the kitchen so mom could sit and do that because she didn't have the mobility, right? Made my head explode every single night. And so, what I learned through a book, and I'll name it in a moment, was the better way to communicate. And that is, instead of saying, I can't believe I have to do this all the time. You're driving me crazy. I'm exhausted, and you just go off. I said to her, Mom, I am so exhausted at the end of the night, and there's so many things we need to do before we both can go to bed. I need to change something in the routine. I would like to bring the toothbrush and toothpaste into the kitchen. Where do you want to put it? Right? So the communication technique is the I statement. I'm exhausted. I can't continue this. This is the thing that's bothering me, right? And that is the toothbrush and toothpaste. And then I didn't end it where she could say yes or no. It's where do you want to put it? Or do you want to put it here or there? Right. So in the very beginning, when someone's on their dementia journey, you can have those kind of conversations. And then at some point you can't. You just have to do what you need to do and set a boundary. And for spouses, that's really hard because they're like, this is my husband or my wife, I don't think I should tell them what they have to do. And yes, you do at some point. But, you know, and really at that point, the contract that's going to change is the one you have with yourself for the dementia family caregiver. And it really, in a lot of ways, putting yourself first. What do I need so I can be the best person during this journey because I deserve to be? And then secondary to that, how can I be the best caregiver? And I do mean secondary, and I know that's controversial for a lot of people, right? But for anybody who's a caregiver, you have a right to a life during caregiving. And setting boundaries and asking for and saying yes to help is part of that creating that new life for yourself.
First, I was thinking of how these contracts help prevent burnout because you are not just fine, just doing the thing that's driving you nuts endlessly and being resentful and tired along the way. And that's eventually going to catch up to you, right? But it's also by doing that ahead of time and saying, this is what we're going to do, and kind of coming to it together, but with your needs first, in a sense, putting your oxygen mask on first, right? You are kind of at least you can still get burned out, but you're at least it might be just more like I'm just tired, I just need a break instead of I'm tired, I need a break and I never want to see mom again. You know what I mean? You're kind of like removing that part of the burnout from the equation at least.
Right.
But then it's also striking me as you were talking about this other part of it that you're preserving the relationship as well. So, because especially with dementia, as they lose those abilities to regulate emotionally, or as they lose different communication skills that are a big part of a good relationship, then you have the more regulated and rested you are as a caregiver, the better they will do with you because they feel that resentment in you, even if they can't name it. They feel that agitation in you, and that can be catchy. It can be contagious. And then that just amps up the difficulty of an already difficult situation. And so I feel that there's like a twofold benefit there by writing yourself a contract first or thinking of your own contract before you even bring your person into it. to say, I'm going to do my best to care for myself through this experience. And in order to do that, I need to say, these are the things I can't do, or these are the things that I need help with as a caregiver, or these are the things that the other person needs to honor for me so that it's not so one-sided, like I'm just going to take care of you. Because
Mm.
no matter how patient, endlessly patient, and good-hearted you are, there will come a point where you cannot hold up that end of it, and there will be some level of resentment. And then that feeds guilt and other things. So, it prevents a lot of those things from sneaking in by looking more closely at it at the beginning. And so, yeah, I don't know. I know all about your book and your theories and all of it, but it's just hitting me in a new way that, yeah, you kind of remove those, or at least reduce the overwhelming senses of remorse, resentment, guilt, grief that can overpower a situation and make it
Mm.
just impossible to do simple tasks. Um,
Right. Yeah, and I think, again, I'm always struck when I talk to spouses. It's so much harder for them to renegotiate that contract. And in fact, it's so much harder because they've had 50 years of getting on one another's nerves. And dementia, the person with dementia and the person without dementia know how to push those buttons, right? Like zing, and they're going to do it. But that brings up the whole idea of communication, and that is as the disease progresses, the person can't verbalize, right? And so it comes out in behaviors. And we can react to those behaviors in a negative way, which amp things up, or it becomes out in behaviors where they're asking questions. And and what we go to do, because this is who we are, is we go to solve it. Don't solve it. What's the emotion underneath that? Right? Like, I want to go home. I want to go home. Why? You are home. No, are you missing your mom? Who are you missing? Like what's underneath that? And you can be a
Mm.
detective and find that out, and then you know, validate that, right? And the worst thing is you say, "Oh no, you're fine." No, they're really not. They may not be able to tell you exactly what's going on, but there's something underneath there. And so, which we talked about siblings a little bit, which truly, it is okay if you keep some people away from the person who has dementia. It's just fine. Because you really need to correct mom that she wasn't married in 1945, she's married in 1946. No, you don't. And there are just some people who are like, the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And it's like, we're not doing that. So here, let you do the financial piece. Let me let you talk to the doctor, right? Right. And that's part of caring for yourself is looking at your world. And this, my favorite saying is you have your family of origin and your family of choice. And that family of origin will not and cannot always react the way you want and expect them to. And part of that in terms of siblings is it doesn't matter if it was two siblings or 10. Every child had a different childhood. And so the way they act and interact is going to be based on their perception and their relationship based on that childhood. You may or may not understand it, but it's their truth. And so if you are banging your head against the wall, trying to get them to do something you want them to do, remember that earworm from Frozen, let it go? Just let it go and move over to your family of choice. Who surrounds you? In your church, in your friendships, in your work, that you can have them help you and not bang your head against the wall because your sister or your brother didn't do A, B, or C. And oh, by the way, if they do A, B, or C, if the person is still safe, was the way they did it really wrong? No. It's like friends of mine who will reload the dishwasher because their husband loaded it wrong. It's like, they were going to get clean, weren't they? I'm not seeing a need to reload this. We get into habits and a way of being. And when your world is shaken, both as the person with dementia and the person who is caring for them, we hold tight onto what we knew and what was. It's the only thing we feel like that we can control and isn't shifting. And the truth of the matter is, it's all shifting, and you can't control a blessed thing.
I was thinking about, oh, well, I think we find that when we do get some engagement from our group members, our private group, um, a lot of people are surprised when they hear, what? People living alone with dementia? How is that possible? And so we have to do a bit of our, or we see that they often have to do um, kind of a reconstruct on their relationship contracts because people automatically assume if you have dementia, you can't live alone, like that the two cannot exist together. But in fact, our members, our group members are thriving. It's just, yeah, it just strikes me that I think many people who, well, first, a lot of caregivers don't identify as that until, later on in their journey. But I think there's just so much attached to that caregiver. Like when you become a caregiver or you are a caregiver, you sort of sometimes assume a little bit too much responsibility or a little bit too much, like I'm super important here and I got to take over and do things right. And to your points of, is this person safe? And these people are living well. So I just wanted to say that we do get a lot of people who don't understand that it is even a possibility to live alone with dementia, but it very much is. And so,
Especially when people are just realistic about it, right? Because in those early stages, there are so many things you can put in place for yourself. I mean, from the legal documents to understanding the different living situations and the costs and that opens up conversations with the people around you who are your support system about, okay, and I say this to caregivers all the time. Have you ever said to your person, how do you want to live out your life? Oh, well, why haven't you? Because the way you think they should be living out your life may not be the way they want to. And if you're really supportive, you're going to help them figure out how to live out their life the way they want to. I think about one client, and he wanted his mother to move to a different assisted living. And he was adamant, but his sister was fighting him about it, fighting him, fighting him, fighting him. And I said to him, so where's the new place? He said, oh, it's down by me. And I said, so how much does that add to your sister's commute? And he said, oh, 20 minutes. I said, so are you going to pick up the slack when she can't be there every day? And there was dead silence. And he let it go. Like sometimes you just have to take a step back and think, I think this is right, but I'm not looking at the whole picture. I'm going with my gut, right? And so let me take a step back and put myself in the shoes of the other person. And also means in the shoes of the person living with dementia. How do you want to live out your life? And if you can talk about that and put a plan in place, then you are supporting them in the way that they need to, and you don't have to drive yourself crazy with, am I doing the right thing? Am I being helpful? Right? Because that's, I think, where we get into it is like, I didn't do the right thing, I wasn't good enough, or this or that. If you know what they want and you're doing it, you are more than good enough.
I have a question. I'm wondering, A, you have this contract from the get-go, but it's going to evolve as the person's needs increase. And there's going to be things that you don't know. Issues arise. Can I call Catherine? So and so, I'm having an issue with this. I need help. How do you adapt when you're realizing your bandwidth is now too thin and there's more needs coming up? Do you reach out to the care team? What do you do in those sort of situations? You sort of touched on that. I just wanted to hear more.
Yeah. So, I think that's brilliant because you do have to plan for it, right? So I think it's really interesting. I think that in some ways it depends on the relationship. Like this person, do you know other members of her care team as well?
Right.
right? So if you
Yeah.
know this person, know other members of her care team, um, you can, I don't like the idea of going behind somebody's back, but being able to say to her,
Right.
I think to make a stronger care team, do you mind if I talk to so and so?
Mm.
Right? Is that okay? Because, I'm not sure I'm always going to meet your needs and I don't know what they're doing exactly. And maybe the three of us can sit down and talk about it, right? But and if you're noticing, I read something recently that more caregivers get calls on how to work a remote or a phone than anything else,
Yes.
right? And that will just will you over the edge. I remember that with my mother too. Oh dear God. So if you're seeing more calls and some of those calls are things you're not comfortable with,
Mm.
it's okay to say, I don't have a lot of knowledge here. So let's see what other people have, right? Or let's see if we need to bring somebody in. And if they continue to call you, you could say, Michelle, oh my gosh,
Mm.
I can't help you, but I'm going to call Deb and I'm going to ask Deb to call you. And or here's the phone number. You know what I'm saying? But recognizing where your boundaries are really important. And then in a way that is open and includes them, finding a way to talk to other people about it as well. And I'm a big one for, one of the things that every chapter, each book has a worksheet or questions to think through. And I'm a big one for saying, it's like, okay, so this goes back to how do you want to live your life? It's like, okay, when does your recycling go out? Sunday nights, every other week. Okay, great. I can't help that, but let's see who else can, right? So, what are the tasks that they need to get done to be able to live in that house, including going to church, right? Like, oh, well, church is at 9:30 every Sunday. You want to continue to go? Let me call the minister or the priest and see if somebody can pick you up, right? Like, and then it becomes this living document that you can use and other people can use and you can add to or subtract from. But until you have those conversations and know how they live their life and want to, you could offer all the help in the world. And if it's not the right help, they're going to turn it down or not get things done. And that can be an individual contract. It's like, okay, I
Correct.
want to help you
Mhm.
live at home, however long you want, but let's set up some guardrails. Okay. If this happens or these three things happen, how do you how would what do we need to change? Right? Do we need to, what would you like to do? Would you like to get a caregiver in? Would you like to start looking at a new place to live? Right? And as again, the earlier you can to have those conversations about, you know, if this were to happen, what would you want us to do? Right? And then the other thing is, I will say to you, is never make a promise you don't know you can keep. Right? Especially when somebody's feeling vulnerable and scared, will say, oh, mom, I'll never put you in an assisted living or a nursing home or whatever. I mean, I had that with my mom. When my dad died, they'd been married for more than 60 years. They'd been in our family home for more than 60 years. I could not fathom taking my mother out of that home where all her memories were. But I also never promised her that she could stay there forever. I said to her, Mom, I need you to keep strong and be able to still use your cart to walk around in the house. Because if you ever went to a wheelchair full time, we do not have the money to retrofit the house. Right. And there came a time, and it was my health after 9 years at home, it was my health where I said, I'm having heart palpitations. I'm not sleeping. What can we do different? And we had had conversations about my mother moving into assisted living all along. What would it look like? When would we do it? My mom was Italian. What's the food like? Can I have whatever I want? Whatever the question was, we addressed it. And that time came when my health was really affected. And she said, and I am so grateful, your health is more important. I'm ready to move. Right. Like that was such a gift. It really, really was. Um, and so, but having those conversations, and sometimes you say, okay, now I'm going to write it down, right? So we can go back and look at this. or I'm going to record it. I want you to say, yes, we could do it. Now, that may or may not work down the line when deep in the disease, but in your heart, you know you're doing the right thing because you've had the conversation. And they, at least at one point, had the ability to say yes and truly meant it.
I love that. I think that having those visuals for yourself as a caregiver can be so valuable in moments of guilt or overthinking a decision, or maybe if I just try harder, or maybe if I just get more rest, maybe if we could just figure out this rest thing, I could keep at it a little longer, you know what I mean? But I think a lot of caregivers put their health at risk, in hopes that they can just keep going. But yeah, what a gift that because you had ongoing conversations with your mom from the beginning, I think that is probably a big reason why she was able at that time to see the impact on you and realize this isn't worth, my staying in this home isn't worth seeing my daughter
You know,
going through health things. It just makes it more of a symbiotic relationship of caregiver to person that's, receiving the support versus that caregiver carry kind of dynamic, which
yeah,
typically does not work.
it's the autonomy and the agency, right? Like my mom was, she was still an adult. I couldn't treat her like a child, right? She was still an adult. And I had to come at it like that. And the other thing that was an aha moment, a real gift, and I think this is really true of any person living dementia. I was sitting in a networking meeting, and you know how you have to introduce yourself. And I said, today's my mother's birthday, and I'm going up to spend the day with her. And today I will be her daughter and not her caregiver. And that struck me at that moment. That article got a huge hit of people. And I made it a point every time I was up there. I'm going to take this bit of time and I am going to be her daughter and not her caregiver. And that's true of any caregiving relationship, someone living with dementia or not, because when you lose that, you lose the part of the glue that holds you together. Is not for the painter. But I will say that my mother and I, and Michelle, I talked about this, my mother and I struggled when I was growing up. I mean, we really struggled. I was very close to my father and he was the mediator, but we healed our relationship through caregiving. And that is such a gift. And I felt such guilt about moving my mom into assisted living. We had a conversation and she said, no, no, your father and I lived a good life and we want that for you. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I don't know that we could top that really. I feel like that's a beautiful way to wrap it up. I mean, obviously there's
Yeah.
a lot more that could be said, but we want people to read your book. So, or books.
Thank you. Yeah.
Multiple books, which it's in Spanish as well, right? You have
Yes, it is. The first book is in Spanish.
the
Both
first book.
both books are you can get it in ebook, you can get it in audio, and you can get it in print. And the first book is in Spanish and all three of those capabilities as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Wonderful.
I don't have to care for anyone right now, but I'm gonna do an ebook.
Yeah.
That's great.
You know,
Well,
it's
I mean,
interesting. I've
oh,
had
go
people
ahead.
say to me, this works in a marriage too. I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
it does.
I, yeah, I think there's a lot of applications for what you talk about, because relationships are tricky, and
They
um,
sure are.
yeah. So thank you so much for spending time to talk
Thank
about
you,
Thank you for
Deb.
it with
inviting
us.
me.
Yes,
This
of
was
course. I
fantastic.
When you become a caregiver, caregiving changes every relationship in your life, not
absolutely,
just the one with the person you're caring for. So all those things
absolutely.
we talked about, like the way to dealing with the emotions and the way to be in relationship and the best words to use when setting a boundary, all that stuff is true for everybody in your life. And as is, there are some people I set aside
Mm,
when I started this.
Hmm.
I just did. I'm like, I mean, well, just put her someplace. I'm like, all right, wait,
Right. No.
bye,
Mhm. Yep.
More
bye. I mean,
complex.
yeah, we're
I'll put you
done. We're done.
someplace over
Yeah,
here on the block
yeah.
list.
Just put her someplace. All right, we're done. And some people went on to be caregivers and got it and are back in my life, and some people are gone, and I'm okay with that. I am perfectly okay with that. It's
I
okay.
love
It's my mental health that has to take priority.
it. Thank you, Deb. All right,
All right,
Catherine, good to
ladies.
see you.
Talk to you soon.
Thanks,
If you ever want to
everyone.
do it again, let me know.
Thank
We
you.
will.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.